Hey guys, it's Cole and welcome to my summary for the Letter from the Producer Live Part 81. If you've been waiting for the Job Actions trailer, this is the one that you've been wanting. And yes, Summoner has some crazy Mecha Bahamut summon I am dying to learn more about, and Pictomancer looks like the amazing technical caster I had hoped for, and so this live letter is a big one, and let's get into it. The live letter began with the Jobs Actions trailer, and then with the starting screen for Dawntrail, which looks aesthetically brilliant in my opinion, and with that color combination, it's always going to work well for me. I love it. They brought up pretty quickly the ongoing DDoS attacks on the Final Fantasy XIV servers, and that this is the largest and longest ongoing attack since the original launch of the game. However, they are working with the infrastructure team at the Square Enix as like the larger company to try and protect the game, but in spite of their best efforts, there are thousands of players still unfortunately being disconnected. However, their efforts are ongoing and they have not given up on this. Next up, they brought up the benchmark, where they talked about how they got feedback from players, and that in addition to the various bug fixes for the benchmark, they are finalizing many adjustments in according to player feedback, such as the Mikode teeth. Screenshots of some of the changes are in the background footage, and more of these changes we will see, especially in the benchmark itself, but these are also going to be ported into the actual full game. In terms of release date for the updated benchmark, they were talking about it might be sometime at the end of May, but I would be remiss to say that they commit to that, so if it's not late May, don't hold that against them. It's just they threw that date out, kind of spitballing it. Next, they talked about how all players will get a free Fantasia, which will be tied to a very quick quest line, which will also get new players hooked into the Fantasia system. Oh no, don't get the new players already hooked on Fantasia. I know too many people have gone down that dark path. How many Fantasias do they sell in the cash shop, I wonder? I'm teasing. But the Fantasia system is also getting changes going forward in general. So once you get a Fantasia and commit your changes of a character, you do get 60 minutes in-game. That's like a grace period that you decide if you like the changes or not in the game itself, and you can revert back within 60 minutes if you don't like the changes you made. From there, they now focused on the meat of the live letter coverage, which is the upcoming job adjustments. They, however, won't be going into extreme depth. That is for the media tour. General job guidelines that they followed were that all jobs get new actions in accordance with the raised level 100 cap, and that older skills may have been reworked in order to make rotation flow better based on feedback. So a lot of QOL is going to be in here. However, they stated that the rotational changes aren't expected to be extensive, but some jobs may require rotation tweaks. Before they got into the specific role and job changes that they're looking at for Dawntrail, they talked about a new setting called Action Change Settings being added to the game. The main goal of the system is to reduce the number of individual key bindings that you need, especially through the life of the game. We've seen more and more buttons be added, and this has become more and more of a thing that people have wanted. Isn't there a mod for this? But essentially, you can have a current skill in, say, a 1-2-3 combo, or their example was Dragoon's jump off GCD ability change, which goes into the next logical combo piece. Think something like a PvP combo step. However, they made it super duper clear that not all players want this, and so this is an optional feature. From there, they now went into the overarching role changes and more specific ones per category. First up is going to be tanks, and that the Rampart shared rolled action, and each tank's custom 30% damage reduction abilities, which each of them gets one of those, will get an unspecified upgrade, but it will get an upgrade. Reprisals also having its duration raised to 15 seconds. You're going to notice that also happens with like melee DPS, for instance, with their feint ability. This is just to make it easier to cover the damage. And I have a sneaking suspicion that in Ultimate, we're going to be looking at like AoEs that the boss does with like, say, like 10-second thing, where maybe you get like 5 seconds wiggle room. Actually, that might be too generous. We'll see. But I have a sneaking suspicion. They start off by going into the specific Paladin changes. Atonement is no longer spamming 3 atonement, but now they're differentiating it into different abilities, but keeping all 3 on the same button, flowing from atonement to 2 new abilities. Like the action change settings mentioned above would be a prime candidate for seeing all of this on the same button. In addition to this, Paladin will get a new action after Blade of Valor that they will be able to use, and Goring Blade will require fight or flight debuff active in order to use. For Warrior, they're getting a new finisher that they can use after spamming 3 Fell Cleaves during inner release, and then they're getting a new follow-up ability after Primal Brand that is being added. Dark Knight is fusing their Blood Weapon and Delirium abilities into one button in order to try and tackle button bloat to some level, and then a new action following using Living Shadow is going to be added when, say, you like summon Frey, and then you also have Living Shadow not cost gauge anymore. Gunbreaker is getting a new continuation ability after Fated Circle and a 3-step combo after Bloodfest that doesn't cost any cartridges. Sonic Break can now be be executed after no mercy buff, and that there is going to be some ability, some big ability named End of Heart. Melee role changes include that second wind, which is that personal heal ability is getting stronger, and that feint, the button to reduce the target's outgoing damage, is also getting a duration boost in line with what we saw with Reprisal for tanks. Monk is getting a significant rework on the surface where there's no need to manage buff durations or damage over time debuff through Demolish. Instead, they're shifting the complexity into the order of abilities, with potency kind of daisy chaining one ability after another. They said that Monk should feel mostly the same as today, but they are streamlining the understanding of Monk's rotation flow, and this is going to impact the jobs gauge as well, but it should be largely the same. In addition to that, there is also a huge QOL increase where during Brotherhood, Monks would have like this chakra overflow issue, and so during Brotherhood you can get up to 10 chakra stored, and that this is going to impact the ability Six-Sided Star that is getting it like passive adjustment through this, where the more chakra stacks that you have, the more damage it does, and so balancing that is going to be an interesting thing for Monk. For Dragoon, they tried to not change too much, but to smooth things out, they simplified the two separate abilities Fang and Claw and Wheeling Thrust into the no positional ability needed ability named Drakesbane. So Drakesbane is going to replace Fang and Claw and Wheeling Thrust, and it's going to be no positionals. So the rotation is going to feel the exact same in that way, but with no positionals. However, Life of the Dragon will be also available at the start of battle for even more upfront Dragoon damage. There's going to be no need to like build up Life of the Dragon. They also didn't get into too many details, but they also did state for Dragoon they are looking at removing some actions or adjusting others to reduce the number of inputs that you need on Dragoon. Spine Shatter Dive, for example, was used to produce more damage because there's damage tacked on, and to us being Final Fantasy 14 players, if it's an OGCD with damage, we're going to shove it into a buff window. But this Spine Shatter Dive ability has been removed, and there is a new exclusively mobility option added for Dragoon. Ninja is also getting a pretty big QOL change where Huton, the attack speed buff, is now just an always on, always active trait, kind of similar to like their move speed trait. You don't need to manage the buff, and likewise all the abilities around that have been shifted, and then the Mudra combination for Huton is now an AoE wind ability that will give your character stealth, so kind of like the water ability. Samurai is having its Tsubemi Geishi now executable after Meikyo Sushi, as well as standard leveling power increase is going to be given to a host of abilities, so Samurai is definitely the most straightforward here. Reaper is having Plentiful Harvest rework to no longer give Shroud gauge, but instead will let you enshroud directly, and so you don't need to worry about wasting gauge. Say if you were at like 51 or above gauge and then hit this, then you'd lose some. Don't worry about that anymore. And then there is a new finisher that you can use while enshrouded, and then there's a new enchantment or enhancement to Harp, which is the ranged ability for Reaper, where now the Hell's Ingress ability is kind of getting cascaded off of that into like a new finisher. Viper is the new melee DPS job being added in Dawntrail, and Yoshi P playing that in the game with actual game footage. I'm going to try and slot in as background footage of this video. So the Viper is primarily built around their combined blade and separated dual blade skills, and using particular skills depending on a host of status effects like how much reawakening gauge you have. Reawakening is what the gauge is actually called. Debuffs on the target and then buffs on yourself. The Viper has been designed to have the same number of actions as other jobs, but there are significantly less buttons, so think kind of like Summoner. Less buttons, but you still have a bunch of different actions. The developers did stress a lot of factors to take into account when you're actually executing the Viper's rotation. It may on the surface level look like button mashing, but there are various buffs and debuff status effects to take into account in order to determine your flow when playing the Viper. With the skill rotation, you have the dual blade skills and then the combined blade skills that might at first seem separate, but you, during a proper rotation flow, are going to be flowing between the two states. But for the showcase sake, you can see how they're branching off into like separate dual and then combined blade skill sets. And so when you accumulate enough of your reawakening gauge, which is that blue gauge you can see, you can go into reawakened mode where you can execute different double-bladed abilities that are significantly enhanced. During the gameplay showcase, they brought up the fast-paced tempo of the Viper, and that as you go through the skill rotation, the goal that the developers had was really for it to get more and more thrilling. And so yeah, once you've activated the reawakened, like the global cooldown during the reawakened state is going to be 2 seconds, and so you need to execute your different double-bladed abilities and really not try and waste your recast time during that to get the best DPS. So Viper is really simple on the surface, especially when you just look at the hotbars, but it gets more complex when you take into account the various gauges, status effects, and speed of the job. Ranged physical DPS roll was the next, and similar to the melee DPS, their personal heal breaking wind is getting buffed, and their damage reduction abilities will get buffed to 15% up from 10. Bard is getting a significant rework where their 3 buffs that we currently have that change how they play, Mage's Ballad, Army's Paeon, and Wanderer's Minuet, will only give buffs and do not involve attacks to enemies anymore. It remains to be seen in the media tour how that actually works out, so we're going to need to wait until we get that information in our hands. Pitch Perfect is now an AoE attack, and so it's going to be more widely useful in combat situations, and Straight Shot Ready and Shadow Proc Ready are now being fused into one ability for quality of life. Machinist is also getting mostly streamlining changes. Barrel Stabilizer, similar to Reaper's Change, will simply allow you to execute Hypercharge rather than add more gauge. Also, Drill will get more charges of Drill so you can store them up and save them up. Heat Blast, Gauss Round, and Ricochet are getting upgrades. Dancer is getting follow-up attacks added to existing actions, one after Flourish has been used, and then one after Technical Finish that consumes Esprit Gauge. So there is also going to be a new action that will grant the effects of Standard Step without needing to go through the step actions, so if you need to like change that buff, that's going to be great. The magical range DPS roll is getting Swift Cast changed to be 40 seconds duration now. I mean cooldown. That's pretty awesome. Adult duration is going to be in line with other rolls, getting an increase to 15 seconds duration. Black Mage's MP Restoration has been reworked into separate MP recovery from time duration, which is what we've had in the past, and instead requires you to land those ice spells. There's also an ability that allows you to reposition ley lines, which is iconic, like say if you need to move and then you don't need to like lose those ley lines, which is just such a common meme, so this is great. But there are also new actions added they didn't talk much about, but I know that we all saw that giant red fireball being lobbed after 6 Fire 4 casts aligned in that like flower gauge. Summoner is getting what is called Solar Bahamut, which is a new summon, which is like a fusion of Bahamut and Phoenix, they called it. There's also a new action that can be used after Searing Light, which Searing Light is like Summoner's AoE buff ability, and so Summoner's skill rotation will be impacted by these 2 changes. Specifically, you will summon Solar Bahamut, Normal Bahamut, Solar Bahamut, Normal Bahamut, and Phoenix. So they didn't go into details about why, but that's what they said. Now, this is going to be a very big point, is in terms of Summoner's Resurrection ability, they were talking back and forth, are they going to add it, remove it, are they going to keep it in? And so Summoner will be keeping Resurrection throughout Dawntrail, but in terms of future expansions 8.0 and beyond, there is no certainty that it will remain, but for Dawntrail, it will remain there. Red Mage Manification will no longer give gauge, but just allow you to execute the enchanted melee combo to prevent resources being wasted in line with Machinist and Reaper's changes. The enchanted AoE combo that consumes black mana and white mana will now use 50 mana, similar to the single target rotation. There's also an additional finisher attack added for Red Mage. Pictomancer is the second new job added for Dawntrail and revolves around painting motifs and renders those motifs into life, and then you can combine multiple motifs to render an extremely powerful attack. The Pictomancer is capable of buffing the party and themselves, but in terms of mechanics, let's start talking about motifs. So motifs the Pictomancer uses includes creature, landscape, and weapon motifs. Each of these corresponds to one of the blank canvases that you can see in the gauge above. Creature, weapon, and landscape motifs from left to right. During combat, in order to draw or create a motif, there is a cast time involved. Outside of combat, there is no cast time. You have like on Yoshi P's hotbars and the footage for Pictomancer, you see Control 8, Control 9, and Control 10 has the motifs for the creature, weapon, and landscape. The next mechanic is Aether Hues. The icon will automatically be replaced by the next icon in the combo route, like a skill rotation combo for like a melee DPS or a tank or something like that. And you're gonna go in the basic rotation from red, green, blue. With the Aether Hue system, you can see in the palette gauge that you get one of those 5 like charges on the palette gauge to change to white color available, and then you can use one of these charges on the palette gauge in the like from left to top in those 5 slots to execute a particular Aether Hue color spell. Like the white one is holy, and there are a variety of outputs for it. Like the black one is like a meteor. We also see, in addition to the 5 slots available in the palette gauge, that there's a rainbow squiggle, and by consuming 50 gauge here on the rainbow squiggle, you can activate what they called a subtractive palette, which changes the element of the Aether Hue. Like we had like the white charge before that we got, and then it became a dark charge, and now your 3 color combo changed as well, as like the white charge is like now the black charge, and now it drops a black meteor. During this subtractive palette phase, when you activate the mode spending 50 gauge, cast times will increase, but you'll have significantly more damage output. So the two basic systems is that you try and get palette gauge charges and rainbow gauge charges, and then unleash more powerful Aether Hue spells. In addition to these systems, there are sub-actions. One sub-action is a mobility one, in which you are directly going to move forward in front of the Pictomancer, similar to Dancers and Avant, but you're also going to get a movement speed buff that will increase like your movement speed for a short bit of time. I already adore this skill. Now back to motifs, because the actions and the gauge is side by side. You may think that you can only utilize it with all three in the row being filled up, but these individual motifs that you can utilize like on their own, and so they're not all required, and they can be used in various combinations either on their own or like in a larger tapestry of your rotation. And so each of these motifs have their own spenders, which will render the motif in existence. So on the gauge, you've painted the motif, but you need to like actually render that motif that you chose for its actual full effect, which rendering it is something like dropping giant pom-poms from Moogles pouring out onto your enemies. No one's going to ask where we got them from. But the thing is, you need to have that on your canvas, and then when you spend it, the canvas is then made blank. Now what becomes wild here is that there's like built-in systems into that even, and so now we spent like a creature motif, we can then cast the wind creature motif, and then the wing motif on the canvas will render wings and make a wind AoE, and then after that we have a Moogle appearing over the creature canvas, like a little Moogle stamp, and then that's alongside a smaller icon of little pom-pom and wings icons, and now we can render a full Moogle, which is kind of like a bigger, higher level of rendering, just based off of like building up the previous smaller renders, which does like its laser blast. And then we can now draw a claw creature motif after that, and with the claw now we can draw a set of fangs, and then we render all of that combined together into an even larger render, even more powerful attack, and that does like a lot of damage. Now for the weapon motifs, we have a hammer, and we render it as an attack. It's actually a status effect that gives you a hammer, which is like a combo or something like that, and then you can just basically use this as a mobility tool. And then for the landscape motif, it has longer casting time because it's the depiction for our party buffs, and it's like also unlocking special attacks that you can use too. But this is going to be buffs that we apply to the party, and this also will augment our Aether Hue abilities to be cast without the longer cast time, and so it would be really useful during any burst phase like an opener. Next up is the healer role is just getting the swift cast cooldown reduced to 40 seconds, which I can say I definitely appreciate, especially because we might not have like a ranged magical DPS in the party with a revive, so this is going to be really good. White Mage is getting a new action that allows a White Mage to move forward quickly, so like an Avant, which is great, and there is also a new AoE attack that can be used 3 times after Presence of Mind, so just more damage spells, which is always great. And then we also got a new trait to get stacks of Tetragrammaton, which is that single target OGCD heal. Scholar's getting a brand new ability named Seraphism, which will change the caster's appearance and enhance their healing magics, and there's a new AoE ability that can be used after Chain Stratagem has been executed, which is like an AoE damage over time ability, which, yay, Scholar finally gets another dot. I'm excited. I'm sorry, that's awesome. Astrologian is getting an extremely extensive rework to the card system. Basically, they're going to draw 4 cards on a 60-second cooldown, and one of those cards is going to do a curative effect, like a heal. One of them is going to do a damaging effect, one of them is going to be a defensive buff, and one of them is going to be an offensive buff. And then you just choose where you want to slot in those cards every 60 seconds. So RNG has been removed. It's a bit more like playing Hearthstone or Yu-Gi-Oh! With like a set hand of cards, I guess. So Astrodyne's gone, and Astra will also get another stack of Essential Dignity. Sage is getting changed, where Eucrasia will now change their AoE Discrazy ability to now be like an AoE like Eucrasian Dosis, which is just a damage over time effect. There's also a new party buff that the Sage gets that I honestly am shocked it took this long. I honestly thought Panheima would be this originally, but think about it like straight up AoE Cardia, and that is pretty freaking cool. Also, they're getting a trait that shortens the recast time of Soteria, which is like an ability that enhances the effects of Cardia. And with that, I need to immediately get to editing this video. Oh my god. Pretty cool stuff here. I'm actually really excited. We'll talk about that later. This video's long enough.